Hi, everybody. This is Ashleigh Boyd for the I Feel Everything Parent Summit. This is David. David, could you tell us about yourself and what your business is?
Um, sure. My name's David Sauvage. I live in New York City, even though at this moment I'm currently in LA. The word business to me feels like a stretch. What I've been doing is making something of a career of late with my empathic or intuitive abilities. You could call me, if you like, a professional empath. I do a kind of work where I tune into people's feelings, feel what I feel they're feeling, and then reflect it back to them. And I use this mirror to guide people, as I like to say, back to themselves. I've been doing this as performance art in art galleries, and I've been doing it as theater, and I've been doing shows. But I've also been doing consulting. So I've done some corporate consulting around how to create a more kind or compassionate culture in a company, including for big brands like the Four Seasons, as well as startups. And I'm interested in how do we shift the culture to a place where we prioritize people's emotional well-beings.
That's major. I'm a nurse PRN in the ER and ICU, and it's lack thereof of emotional respect for ourselves. It's just kind of an interesting way that we give emotionally, but we don't really get anything back for it. It's kind of a task at this point, especially for myself with the newly discovered abilities. And realizing that I can harness them in a different way. So how did you learn that you were gifted, and how did you learn to harness these amazing gifts? Because I feel like it's still each person is different, but it's still a little overwhelming from my perspective.
Um, it's a fun story. 10 years ago, I was particularly lost, and a friend suggested I talk to her psychic, which I thought was ridiculous. Talking to psychics was a waste of time unless you wanted to be entertained, and I didn't find them that entertaining. So I said no, but she said that she would pay for it as a gift. So I said okay, and I got on the phone with this psychic, and I don't really remember what the reading went like, but at the end of it, she said, "You're psychic." And I thought that was silly and I dismissed it. But it stuck in my head and I couldn't get rid of it. And all these experiences started happening that I could not explain. And then I remembered all these experiences that had happened where I knew things and there was no possible explanation that I could wrap my mind around how I could know that. And that was about 10 years ago. And since then, my development of my intuitive abilities, well, before I was developing them, I had to acknowledge that I had them. And then from acknowledging I had them to developing them consciously, which was more about playing and having fun and experimenting. And then there was a certain threshold where it was what I was showing up with everywhere. And then accepting that. That's half the story. That's probably not even the more important half. The more important half is just around personal healing, going into the places where I hurt the most and working through them. And as I did that, I discovered that what was hurting me the most, in fact, the cause of so much of my own depression, wasn't even mine. I was holding other people's feelings in my own body. And I processed these feelings that weren't mine, worked through them, and then on the other side of that, I was really, really sensitive. And I had to learn how to protect myself. I had to learn basic tips and tricks around how to manage other people's energies and emotions. And those two strands, this hypersensitivity and this intuitive ability, came together to create whatever it is I'm doing, something like a career on being an empath or a semi-professional intuitive or a consultant in emotional intelligence or whatever it is.
I like that, consultant in emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
So you say that you have tips that you utilize to help harness, to help yourself from others. what suggestions do you have for somebody who's new at discovering being an empath? Because as of right now, I'm learned to like really like visualize like just being safe and taking negative energy and like bouncing it off of me. Like that's kind of like what I've been doing. Any other tips or suggestions?
Yeah, I feel like saying by way of self-promotion that I often teach classes in this very subject. I just taught a class called School for Empaths online, and I intend to teach another class on this subject, how to thrive as an empath, sometime in the fall online. But I'm happy to summarize what I think are the most important things. The first really basic one is what you've already started to do, which is visualizing whatever you need in order to protect yourself. In many cases, that can be a bubble. I see a bubble around me, energy bounces off that bubble. Or it could be, this doesn't work as well for me, but works for a lot of people, calling in a divine white light of protection. And I would actually just recommend somebody Google like how to protect myself as an empath and start looking at all the different ways. And it's really trial and error. I know what works for me doesn't work for other people that I even teach, and vice versa. It's all very personal. But I will say that these tips and tricks will only get you so far. If you are in a deep relationship with another person and their energy is flowing with yours, imagining a bubble around you will do absolutely nothing about that. It's not going to help you in your relationship with your child, for instance, if you guys are in an energy loop. So a deeper and more powerful technique, which is not easy and takes a long time, is body awareness. It's more important to be aware of what's happening in your body on an energetic and emotional level than it is to protect yourself. Awareness is the ultimate protection. If you can hold an experience or an emotion in your body without completely associating with it, knowing this is a feeling or an energy flowing through me, it doesn't mean that it's mine, and it doesn't even mean that I have to listen to it. It's just an experience I'm having. The experience is real. I'm not negating it. I'm not repressing it. I'm allowing it to flow through me, but I'm not acting with it. That's a really powerful place. That's a practice. It doesn't happen overnight. You get better and better at it. And then at the deepest level, it's not about self-protection. It's not even about awareness. It's about processing and healing. And here's where we get into the deeper work, but there's no way to avoid it when we talk about this stuff. If you are absorbing other people's emotions or energies and you cannot release them, it's blocking you up. The only way to ultimately release this is to work through what in you is already blocked. So if something is sticking in you, it's because it's already stuck in you. For instance, if you tend to struggle with anxiety and then you sit next to somebody at a movie theater and they have a ton of anxiety, their anxiety will attach itself to your anxiety and you will not be able to tell the difference, and you will walk away with your anxiety and their anxiety because you have not worked through your own anxiety. If you don't have anxiety and you sit next to somebody at a movie theater and you feel their anxiety, you will still feel it as an empath, but it will likely flow through you much more easily. So that's a call for doing deep healing work. What is the source of your anxiety, and how does one work through it in that hypothetical? That's the only real long-term solution.
I think that's brilliant. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, but nobody's really explained it that way. And to me, that's a simple explanation of like, your own junk is going to be more junky.
Amplified. Yep. Or I totally agree. Your own junk is going to be more junky. Or if you want to look at the universe as benevolent, which we don't have to, we could say that the world is constantly showing you what you most need to work on.
Right.
And as an empath, it's amplified. Mm-hmm. So the importance of being emotionally healthy as an empath is 10x more important than for the average person, because everything that you're experiencing at a higher resolution and much louder, and you're also reflecting it back more, and you're also absorbing more. So you have much more stuff to process. If you don't process it, you're going to be that much more depressed, anxious, confused, and so are the people around you.
That's amazing. That just like totally like is an aha for me, because I've been really working on a lot of different things personally, because I felt that how can I help others if I'm having these issues? And I felt like that's what I attract when I go into the hospital, is the issues that I have.
Absolutely.
So that's crazy that you made it a very simple statement, because it makes it very tangible in your head when you're thinking about it that way.
Nothing can stay stuck in you that isn't already stuck in you.
Mm-hmm. So clear. Mm-hmm. So for parents, specifically with little ones or teenagers that might feel that their kids are gifted or know that they're gifted, are unsure of like what the heck they're supposed to help their kid with and how to do it, what suggestions do you have?
I want to make a little bit of a distinction between sensitivity or empathic nature and intuition. I speak both of those languages fluently, but I want to make a distinction between the two of them in terms of how to approach it. And they overlap, of course, but I want to talk about them separately. After the phone call, I'm in my parents' house, by the way, so this is fitting. I live in New York by myself in a nice apartment, but at the moment I'm in Los Angeles staying at my parents' place. So I'm very conscious of the way their energy affects mine. I apologize for the ring.
I think it's funny to actually hear a telephone ring.
Yeah, old school. It's weird.
It's even better.
So sorry for this.
No worries, I'll edit it out. I think it's hilarious.
You'll edit it out, good. Okay, at least you can edit it out. But if you don't, that's fine too.
I think it's awesome.
Okay, so for the child who's emotionally sensitive, both sensitive in the conventional sense of things tend to affect her or him more than they seem to affect other children, and for the child who's empathic, who's absorbing other people's emotions generally, I have one super important, inarguably true dictum that I want to share with all parents forever. It is my parents did not do this, or they failed at this, and that caused the greatest suffering of my whole life. And that is, the great sin a parent commits with their child who's sensitive is to invalidate their emotional experience. Mm-hmm. There is nothing more dangerous, and I actually literally mean this, nothing more dangerous, including hitting them or other forms of physical abuse. I think it is more dangerous to invalidate their emotional experience. And by that I mean, here are the worst things a parent can say to a child. Why do you feel that way? Stop being angry. Why are you so frustrated? Get over it. The invalidation of the inner experience robs the child of the ability to process their own emotions. Mm-hmm. However, it is totally okay to dictate the child's behavior. And as a parent, that's your job and your power. So here would be what I would suggest if the child is acting out. Something like, I see that you're very angry. It's okay that you're angry. It is not okay that you threw that ball at your friends. That is not acceptable behavior. That distinction is super important. So if a parent says, stop being so angry, or why are you so angry, as if the anger itself is a problem, all you are doing is repressing that anger in the child, and worse, you're teaching that child that their inner state is not acceptable. And so they will eventually contract if they have a depressive psychology, which I had, or they'll start spinning out of control if they have a more anxious psychology. Yes, so that's the most important thing. Behavior, do whatever you want, regulate it as you need. Inner life, leave it to the child. It's okay, whatever they're feeling.
I totally agree. And it's interesting because, again, my parents had no clue that I felt the way that I felt because it just wasn't talked about. And same with my brother. And it wasn't always like, why are you mad? It was, why are you snippy? Why are you so rude? Why are you this? And it was like, I had no idea. Like, and it's interesting now that I look back on it, if it was a different conversation, it totally would have changed my perception of what others thought of me too. So it creates this whole umbrella effect.
Yeah, so if your parents had said to you, wow, I see you're frustrated, but the way you talk to that person is not acceptable, I'd be happy, though, to talk about your frustration. That would have been a much healthier way of working through that. The reason that your parents probably didn't do that is because, and my parents didn't, is because they don't have a healthy relationship with their own emotions. Internally, they're invalidating themselves. And so they do that to their children. And they will especially invalidate the child's inner experience if what the child is experiencing is something that they don't want to experience themselves. So men will often reject the sadness of their boys or melancholy because it's not cool. And women will often reject the anger of their daughters because anger isn't cool. This is not all, I don't mean to be gender stereotype, but you get the idea.
Right.
So that means that if you really want to avoid doing this in a deep way, you want to not do it with yourself. You want to learn as a parent and as a human that whatever you're feeling, and this is my message to the universe, whatever you're feeling, and I mean anything, hatred, rage, disgust, envy, vengeance, deep desire to do anything harmful to anybody, all of those feelings are totally okay. And I would go further that you don't have a choice about feeling them. What you do have a choice about is whether you accept that you are going through them, and then you also have a choice about whether you enact them. So that distinction is super important, both for the parents to make for themselves as a model for the kid, and then especially in the way they treat the kid.
That's so true, though. It's interesting hearing it come from a third party, I think. I think it's always, it makes it more tangible, and it makes it definitely, because it's not your own thoughts, it just makes more sense, I suppose. So I think it's really a good point, though, to really make sure that you have the distinction between behavior and feelings, because that literally sent me into a spiral as a kid. And even as an adult, I mean, people would, at my workplace, they're like, wow, like, you're kind of harsh, you're kind of rude. And I'm like, no, I'm like, in my head, I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, the reason why I'm doing this is because of this. But people, I think they just, in the real world, and if you're working in a busy, for myself, hospital setting, people just don't acknowledge or have the time to acknowledge certain things. So by being able to control yourself a little bit better and your energy a little bit better makes you then a better person in general.
Yeah.
So
we talk about the intuitive side of it, which is something a little bit different, which is in terms of exploring your intuition, their intuition. Not much needs to be done except for honoring and paying attention to what the child is naturally drawn to. The urge to express oneself or to cultivate one's talents is natural. It doesn't need to be forced or pushed. It will express itself if it's safe, if the child feels sufficiently loved and understood. They will go to what interests them. And if they are naturally intuitive, they will start playing with it. As long as they know it's okay to play with it and it's safe to make mistakes. So I don't think, if you're noticing your child is having incredible intuitions about things and you want to make sure that the educational system doesn't ruin it, all you need to do is make sure that the child knows that her or his inner life is safe and fine, and that whatever they are interested in is cool, and that you're there to support them. And that would hold true whether we're talking about intuition or tennis. Like, there's nothing. Yeah.
That makes sense, though, because that's like my biggest anxiety at this point, because my kid's going to go into preschool next year, and I'm just so nervous of the clutter of what other people do or don't dictate to him. So it should be an interesting process of arming him with the best abilities, and then just having open-ended conversations with him too.
And school is a traumatizing place because it treats children like prisoners and doesn't care about what they really need. It cares about fitting them into the box of the structure that our current economic system pretends it wants.
Mm-hmm.
So because we're sending them into these traumatizing, unloving places, unless you get miraculously lucky with teachers, you got to give them a place to unload that, and that's a matter of continuing to validate their inner experience. Then they can process the disconnect between what they know to be true in their hearts and bodies and what teachers are telling them and what their classmates are telling them.
That's so true. That's awesome.
I'm pretty radical on this stuff. I mean, I just schooled. Like,
I get a little crazy. My husband's like, simmer down. I'm like, but. So
oh my God,
I could talk about it for hours. It drives me batty.
It drives me insane.
So do you have any last tips or tricks for anybody that you feel that we haven't talked about, or are you good?
Let me see. Subtle, but it's important. If you have a highly sensitive child or an empathic child, or like everything, and I do mean everything, that you, if you're a single parent, or you and your partner, if you're doing it together, everything that you aren't working through or processing honestly within yourself is being felt by your child.
Mm-hmm.
That does not mean you should run out and do tons and tons of therapy to process everything that you haven't processed so that your child won't pick it up, because then all they'll pick up on top of what you already haven't processed is all your anxiety around processing it.
Mm-hmm.
What would have made the difference for me growing up, and what I would suggest to parents, is to be vulnerable and transparent as you can about the emotional issues you have not worked through. Because it gives your child a chance to find his or her own way through that stuff. So for instance, if you and your partner suffer from a lot of anxiety, but you never talk about anxiety, it's just always floating in the air, your kid is picking that up and doesn't know what to do. They will inevitably act out so that you pay attention to their anxiety. And you will, if you haven't worked through it and you're afraid of it, inevitably reject that acting out because you don't want to face it in yourself. It's asking too much to say, poof, get rid of your anxiety as a parent. But it's not asking too much to say, hey, talk openly with your child if they can understand it, and certainly with your partner about what crap you are bringing to the table. Then you give them a path out. And if you don't, they're going to have to find their way through that years later, and it's going to be much more expensive and much more painful if they ever do. Or they'll pass it on to your grandkids.
Right.
And you'll just see it generation after generation.
It's so true, though. I mean, in my family, like, you always swept everything underneath the rug, and you just kind of never really talked about it. And it's kind of funny. My husband and I are the exact opposite. Like, I can't stand not just like vomiting out how I feel or my emotions. And he is very receptive to that. So I think it's huge. If you want to break the cycle or the pattern, you have to, as the parent or the adult, begin that process yourself. And that's kind of what I just decided to do when I got older, was just surrender and just say, you know what, screw this. I'm not going to feel like that anymore. And by talking about it, it's huge. It's not the white elephant in the room anymore.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Awesome. Well, David, can you let everybody know where they can find you?
Yeah, super easily. My website is www.empath.nyc, or on Instagram at empathnyc. Yeah, check me out. Come to a show, see what happens next, and I'm really interested in this conversation around how to parent sensitive children. So I'm happy to continue that conversation however it wants to be continued.
That's awesome. I appreciate you. I appreciate your knowledge. I know that I learned a lot, and I know that the audience will too. So I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Ashleigh.
Have a good one.
You too.